Hey there, friends. So I'm going to ask for your pardon at the beginning because I'm in this state of I'm getting a cold. Oh, I feel better. I'm getting a cold. I feel better. And suddenly the I'm getting cold part, was, coughing last week and has turned into the sniffles tonight. So who knows? But anyway, this is a video that I've had in my head for a little bit. And I thought I would talk about sort of non-tarot tarot decks, or tarot decks that might be more of an oracle, or that you might call a Taroracle if you were so inclined. Now this deck is theoretically, this video is theoretically about this deck, because I wanted to sort of talk through my thoughts on this deck. But in thinking about it, I wanted to bring out a couple other decks and just talk about them. So again, I'll try to put timestamps if you just want to hear my thoughts on specific things. I'm not super good at remembering to put things in the description, but I'll do my best. I'm not going to talk much about this deck, as I have done quite a bit of yapping about it in recent months and weeks. But I wanted to bring it out because I feel like these are decks that take the system we know about tarot and tweak them to greater and lesser degrees. And I've been thinking a lot about, actually one of the questions in Katie Flower's Tarot Obsessed tag was, essentially how, I can't quite remember the wording of it, but sort of how far can you go from the system of tarot and still be a tarot? And it's a really interesting question, and I don't know that I've come down on one side or the other there. But these are three decks that really kind of are exemplary of decks that really push the system, with varying degrees of success. So I just want to talk about that and my thoughts on them, and why I do and don't enjoy working that way. So this started out to be a review of this deck, which anyone who follows me on Instagram in particular knows that I've done a lot of hemming and hawing about whether or not I wanted to get it. And I ended up buying it ultimately because of my experience with Into the Wildwoods and working with a deck that I also hemmed and hawed a lot about. And there were some things about this deck that I felt like were not going to work for me, and they ended up being great. And so I thought, oh, maybe I should stop whining and give these decks a chance. And then this deck I'm including here because it plays by similar rules in terms of its sort of playing fast and loose with tarot structure. This I've had for a really long time, and I've maybe used it once or twice. It's been, in fact, I couldn't find it for a long time, and I was just cleaning out a bookshelf a couple weeks ago, and I found it sort of stuck behind some stuff. So that shows you how often I've used it. But I think, these three decks are similar in that they really push tarot in a different direction. So I'm going to, how do I want to do this? The focus of this video is meant to be the Dreams of Gaia Tarot. So what I think I'm going to do is just share my thoughts about that deck, and then share some thoughts about non-tarot tarots, or Taroracles, as I've whimsically taken to calling them recently. Pardon the sniffles again. All right. So this is a little bit more, one of the things I've been thinking about doing lately, especially when there are decks that have been around and a lot of people have talked about them, is not necessarily doing a walkthrough, because I feel like, those things exist already, and I don't want to steal anyone's thunder. But what I like hearing from other people is sort of their thoughts and impressions of decks and how they work with them. So what I think I may start doing more and more is, rather than when unless it's something that nobody's seen before, or that's really out there, you know what I mean? What I may do is when I get a new deck, spend some time with it, and then share, my experiences with it. Oh my god, the sniffles drive me crazy. I probably should do this later. I just happen to have time alone right now to do this. So here are thoughts on the Dreams of Gaia Tarot. And I'm fairly sure that Raven Phelan has said that, this really is somewhere between tarot and oracle, and tarot For her may, may even for her be kind of a misnomer. But this is a deck that you kind of want when you see it. I mean, it's beautifully packaged. I think it may be one of the most beautifully packaged decks I've ever seen. The packaging itself is maybe a little higher quality than the deck from like a production standpoint, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I've had this sitting on the desk here, sort of leaned up against the wall, so it's sort of been facing me, and I just it's sort of like the Apple of decks, the Apple products, the MacBook of decks in a way. It's like the thing that I've always loved about Apple is that, for me anyway, their products, their packaging makes me want to reach for those products, and the products themselves make me want to reach for them. And oh my god, and I'll stop commenting on my sniffles. And this has a very similar feeling to that. It's just a really inviting, packaging, which I think is really impressive. The box came to me a little crushed, so it's not super easy to open, but it's getting there. So again, everyone's sort of seen walkthroughs of this. I do have the second edition, which has the back with the image on it. That doesn't bother me. I actually like it. I liked the original back with just the black, and I like this just fine. And sort of judging by the production issues folks had with the first run, I'm actually kind of glad I waited. So I have been working with this deck a little bit the last few days, and I just wanted to talk about kind of, again, what makes it a Taroracle, or what makes it a non-tarot tarot. I think this goes about as far as you could from tarot and to still qualify as one. It sort of pushes the envelope, I think, about as far as you can go. And frankly, I do think it falls more on the oracle end of the spectrum. And in a weird, it's tough, and this is one of the things I had sort of a weird relationship with it, and trying to decide whether I wanted it and how much I felt like investing time and energy into it. Because, again, I don't work with oracle a lot. There are a handful of decks I have that I like, and there are a handful of systems I have that I like. Sibylla is one. I just received a Deste deck, so I'm curious to explore that a little bit. This is its own system, and ultimately what I think about this deck is it's not like anything else. It doesn't, from what I can detect, have a correlation to any existing tarot system. It's its own system. And I think one of the reasons why folks struggle with it, and why I struggle with it a little bit, is that I want it to be more like a traditional tarot deck. Even just a little bit more, in my opinion, would make me a little happier. Now, that's about me and what I want. It's not about what the deck creator wanted, and that's sort of what I'm trying to remind myself of. What I said when I finally came around on the Wildwood Tarot was, I've already got the Rider-Waite-Smith. I've already got the Marseille. This is a different system. And it comes down to whether or not I'm willing to invest in learning that system. Like, how much do I feel attracted to this system in order to spend time learning it? And that's one of the unique things about these Taroracles, is that some systems you can use in many different ways. The Rider-Waite-Smith, for example. You can use the Rider-Waite-Smith system with many decks, because there's many iterations of it, many clones, many explorations of it. But you still get more or less the same experience. You have more or less the same system at play. Likewise, the system that I teach in Tarot on Earth, which is inspired by Marseille reading, but, from my angle and from what I've learned, you know what I mean? So again, that's a system you can use with many decks. The thing with these Taroracles, whether it's the Dreams of Gaia, or the Osho Zen, or even the Wildwood, is that you are learning a system that's specific to one deck. And what that means as a reader is committing to learning that system that really can only be used with that one deck. And that's an interesting conundrum, right? And so if you if you learn how to read Rider-Waite-Smith, I mean, you're setting yourself up to read 90% of the decks that are out there. If you commit to learning Thoth decks, you are, there's a handful of Thoth inspired decks. Not a whole lot, but there's more and more. You've got the Thoth deck, you've got I think the Crystal Visions, maybe one. The Sun and Moon is one. There are others, that are inspired by Crowley. When you're looking at the Osho Zen, or in this case, the Dreams of Gaia or the Wildwood, you're learning a system that's specific to one deck. For some folks, it's that's great. Some people are not deck promiscuous, as I am. I am deck promiscuous. I don't, I like to experiment, as it were. And I like to have all different options available at my disposal. I'm not that way with people, but I am that way with decks. I just reach for what strikes my mood. The reason why I had such a good experience with the Wildwood was because it was a situation where I was set up to work with it almost every day for a month. And if there were a Dreams of Gaia challenge, that might give me incentive to work with this. Having worked with it for a couple weeks, I don't know the system fully, and I'm still working around it. But so what I want to do right now, I guess that's the first message of this video, right? Is like with all three of these decks I'm looking at, and any tarot oracle, is if it's a unique system, the question for whether or not you're going to like it, to me, is in direct correlation to the amount of energy you want to dedicate to learning it. And the amount of energy you want to dedicate to learning it, to me, is also in direct correlation to the connection you have to the system, the ease with which you understand that system. When I think about learning a Marseille-style system, that clicked almost instantly for me. And Sibylla was similar, right? That was a system that just clicked. That's not the case for everyone. And this is, for me... Now, I'm just sort of getting into the complicated thoughts about this, but for me, this is not a system that's clicking quite as easily. And I think part of it is that I can't quite detect a consistent pattern. There are a couple, and I'm going to talk about those right now. But in terms of the system that the deck is created with, as a brain, essentially, I have not yet unlocked the keys, or I haven't even found the keys to unlock the system. That helps me remember it. Because what I don't want to do, and this is, by the way, a beautiful guidebook. The design of it is incredible. This cover is beautiful. I've beat it up a little bit because I really wanted to get in there. And this is a personal thing, but one thing I hate as a reader is having to sit down with a guidebook and read it like a novel, read it like a tome. I want to be able to sort of peruse it, skim it, and get a sense of the system, and then so that I have enough in my head where I can leap into it and jump into the cards. This, for me, isn't that. Like, this is requiring, every time I pull cards, to pick up the guidebook and read the keywords and description for each one. I don't enjoy reading that way, but there's no, for me, other way to learn it. You know what I mean? There's no mnemonic I've discovered, aside from the structure of the majors and the structure of what are essentially the equivalent of the chords. So again, what I think about this deck from a use standpoint is it's I don't know that it will enter the repertoire until I have somehow managed to unlock the code that helps me remember the system. It's very elemental, but the elements are there, but like the connection to the numerology, for example, it's very different. Like the meanings of the cards, this isn't Waite-Smith, this isn't Thoth, this isn't numerology, this is its own system. So let me just give you an example of that. I'm going to push this out of the way. I ordered the deck slightly differently for this video than I, normally I would put it back in order. I put sections back in order. But so how, one thing you want to know, if you're considering it, is that the court system is, what did I do? So the court system is nothing, for the first two, is nothing like the any other tarot, really. So what you have for the page is number 11, and number 11 for this system is like these polarities. So for the polarity for the suit of earth is heaven and earth. For water, it's emotion and intellect. For air, it's body and mind. And then for fire, it's masculine and feminine. So instead of a page, you have these polarities in the system. And then instead of knights, you have number 12, which are these kind of roles, these jobs, these sort of people who are a thing. But it's not like they're knights. You know what I mean? Each one is its own thing. Each number 12. So we have the hero for fire, the scribe for air, the counselor for water, and the seneschal for earth. And I keep having to look up what a seneschal is, which again is something. It's I keep having to read it, like I need a dictionary to work with this deck. Now, I will say as I talk about this, and I'm kind of giving you, I guess, my negatives first. I keep having to go to the book. When I go to the book and I put the stuff together, I've actually gotten very good readings from this. So that's one thing I will say. But I don't like feeling like, I know that I can't read for someone else with this because I'm not, it's a servant or an admin. Oh, right. It's someone who sort of is in service to someone else, a trusted servant who has access to and control of his lord's domain. So it's, it's not a word that I reach for, that I have in my lexicon generally. So I keep having to, anytime that card comes up, with the other ones I get it, with these not so much, with the seneschal not so much. So I don't enjoy as a reader having to go to the book for every card. And so that's where I'm at with this deck, because I haven't, and it's been a couple weeks, but I haven't sort of like, I get that the 12 in each suit, which would be the knight normally, is some role in connection to the suit. But it's and actually these are the 4 are probably the easiest to interpret, except for this one, because they're specific jobs, they're specific people, they're things. So, but again, I have to sort of, especially with this one, reach for the book all the time. Now, the next ones are pretty easy because it's Queen and King. Now, the meanings that she gives each of these cards is, a little bit different than, but everyone interprets the chords differently. But so the queens have, this is easy because however you interpret the court cards in this regard, you can work with. And the kings are the same way. So you get a really strong sense of king and queen, and you can interpret them however you want. You don't have to reach for the book. So that's the system of the courts. So the page and knight are gone, and you get for the page these polarities, and for the knight these sort of roles or jobs. And then the system comes to the majors, which are again very different. Nothing in here for the most part correlates directly to the tradition of Visconti Sforza, Marseille, Toth, or Rider-Waite-Smith. This has more cards. It has, I think, 35 majors. I can't remember. Let's see. So 34 maybe, or 24 maybe. So there's more cards, and they're divided into these categories. So the first category is essentially sort of the stages of life. Well, first of all, you get the choice card, which is its own thing, and it kind of stands in for the Fool in its way, but it's not the Fool, as you can see. It's about choice. It's about decision making. It's sort of about engaging in life, and then you get into the stages of life. So we get into child. Now, this card I hate. I'm sorry. Like, I don't like to say I hate art, and I love almost every card in this deck. But this card, it just reminded me of it's just a little too precious for me. It's a little too precious moments. It doesn't seem to fit with the rest of the deck, just being honest. And this was a main reason why I didn't want to buy this deck, because I really did not like this card. I will say that in person, it does not look as bad as it did. It had like a really iggy, creepy quality to me. It does not feel quite that bad in real life. But it was a sticking point me for a long time. So you get the child, and then you get sort of two states of adolescence. You get the maiden and the youth. So you get male and female polarities as well. And then the maiden grows into the mother, and the youth grows into the father, and then the father grows into the crone, and the mother grows into the crone, and the father grows into the sage, and then the last stage is death and rebirth. So that's sort of the first chunk of the majors. So again, you kind of get the Emperor and Empress energy with the mother and the father, and theoretically you could sort of see the High Priestess and the Magician in the crone and the sage, but really everything else is its own thing. And then of course death and rebirth, but this is number 8, so it's not 13. So there's really no relationship, any traditional relationship to the traditional majors. And then the next step is reasons for being, I believe, the next chunk. Yes. And so the reasons for being are knowledge, wisdom, which you get a sense of the Hermit, but again, it's 10, not 9. Healing, love, union. I want to talk about the production quality of the deck too, but this card seems to have come to me creased. Now, I will say I wrote to Blue Angel, and they immediately said, we're sending you a new card, which is nice. Self, abundance, and destiny. And that's the cover of the box. So that's the next stack. So again, there's not really much other than wisdom connected to, or maybe love connected to the Trumps as we know them traditionally. And then finally you get the last chunk, which is influences. And this is where we go beyond the traditional majors. So journey, thought, emotions, desire, perception, intuition, integrity, and faith. So that's the Trumps and the courts. And I'll say that actually this while I would normally say like, oh, there's not enough major arcana connections here to make this a tarot. Actually, I don't mind, because I have all of my decks have traditional majors except for these Taroracles. So I don't mind these changes so much, and the concepts themselves are clear and precise enough and flexible enough that I don't have to reach for the guidebook unless I want to. So that's a nice thing. So those are the sort of major changes to the system of tarot. And then the pips are the pips. And then the main thing here, though, and I'll just sort of flip through as I talk, is that they don't necessarily have they don't have any connection from what I can tell to Rider-Waite-Smith. And I don't also detect any numerological connections either, for the most part. Now, every once in a while, something like this suggest like 3s for me are growth. This is earth. So this picture seems to suggest, planting seeds that will grow, so I get that. But by and large, I don't. Here's another one that kind of seems to, 4s are stability and foundation. We have this person sort of creating this building, so he's putting in the cornerstone. That seems very solid. In fact, you also get a little bit of, oh no, that would be the 3 of Pentacles, wouldn't it? So you get a bit of stability there. But then with this 5, for me, this is disruption. I guess you could get that, but what you get is sort of gambling tricks to see according to the book. This one, for example, I think if I remember correctly, has to do with parenting and history. I can't quite remember. So some of the images are really clearly creating an image of what are the keywords in the book. Like this has to do with meditation, if I remember correctly. Let me actually look so I can check myself. So that's the 7 of Earth. Earth is the first suit in this deck. So yeah, meditation, grounding, connection cycles. So in that case, you actually see the in the picture, you know, what the card is. But that's not the case all the time. Or it is, but only after reading the book do I say, oh yeah, I kind of see that. Here's another card that's kind of damaged. So this is like the 8 of Earth. Let me see if this one connects to me in that way. So growth, manifestation, accomplishment, success, abundance, wealth, appreciation. See, like I don't quite make that connection with this image as easily. So sometimes the card seems to really summarize the keywords, and sometimes it's not quite as clear for me. So, you know, with any deck, really, you could just interpolate your own card meanings onto the card, and the image is just a nice, you know, illustration that you could explore for intuitive pings. But I'm not a very visual person that way. Like if there's going to be a visual reminder on the card, I almost need it to remind me what the keyword is. So that's been the struggle, right? Is that when I look at the image, I don't immediately ping a connection all the time. But sometimes I do. So it's just, for me, like what I want is not necessarily for the system to be different. What I really wish is that more like the Wildwood, and the reason that I brought out the Wildwood, and the reason I would say the Wildwood is slightly more successful than the Dreams of Gaia for me, is because it accepts that it's a different system, but it doesn't leave you alone. You know what I mean? So you do get a keyword. Now, I'm very much an opponent of keywords on more traditional decks, but and when I'm working with this deck for myself, I do often go to the guidebook to explore more than the keyword. But I like having the keyword because it just means that the deck is more versatile for me. I can bring it out and read. You know, I mean, I can read my Queen of Stones without going to the guidebook, but then the guidebook adds additional stuff. So the guidebook isn't required. What it brings to me is additional insight. For this, the guidebook often is really required. And so again, as I said, like it's a question of how much am I really willing to study the guidebook for the cards. And I don't know the answer to that yet. You know what I mean? Like I have been working with this, and I do... it calls to me, you know what I mean? Like I find myself reaching for this deck and I want to explore it. I want to experiment with it, which is a good sign. But I also want it to be a little, as a deck on its own, you know, maybe it's ego, maybe it's a preference thing, but it is what it is. Like I want the deck to, just be a little bit more, you know, clear without having to reach for the book, which is beautiful and beautifully edited by a friend of ours, actually. You know, but that's the thing, you know what I mean? So the art in this deck, I think, is gorgeous. I really do. This reminds me of the Neverending Story. For the most part, there's only a couple cards that, you know, and that's the case for any deck, right? You know what I mean? No deck is 100% perfect. I can't think of, well, maybe 1 or 2 decks where I think they're about as close to perfect as they get, but the majority of decks, you don't like every card, you know? There are a couple cards here to me that feel a little more like Doreen Virtue than the rest of them. But again, you don't want every image to look the same. This reminds me a little bit of Tira Marchetti's decks. And then here we have the 3 of Fire, which looks a lot like the Fool. So I guess what I would say about this deck overall, in terms of its, you know, my thoughts on it, are that I think it's a beautiful work of art. I think that the question of connecting to it has less to do with the deck itself and more to do with one's willingness to engage the system and learn the system. And I really feel like to get anything out of it, really to get anything out of this deck, because you have, 40 pip cards, right? And then the courts and then the trumps, and there's more trumps than usual. I think that to get what Raven Phelan, is creating for us, you really have to study the guidebook. And it's just a question of how much are you willing to study the system and dedicate yourself to learning this deck. And that's a unique situation, right? Because most systems are usable across different decks. Whether that's, again, Rider-Waite-Smith, Marseille, Toth, all of those systems you can use across multiple decks. Even Lenormand, Lenormand has its system, but you can use many decks with it. Sibylla, playing card. When you have a deck like this, like the Wildwood and like the Osho Zen, which I'm going to look at in a few minutes, you're learning that system, and which can only be used with that deck. And which is very Oracle. When oracles have systems, they're traditionally their own. But they also will only come with 30 cards, say, So it's rare that you have close to, how many are in this deck? 82? I don't know if it says it on the box. Well, it's around, it's over 80. You have to learn those 80 cards, and there isn't like with the numerology of Marseille, for example, you don't get visual cues in the card images. Here, sometimes I feel like you do, sometimes you don't. It's not like across the board 4 plus earth equals this, because 4 is this and earth is that, and then 4 plus cups equal, or water equals this. Like the suits are very much their own animals, and those animals are very different from other systems. So I guess that's what I would say about it. As a piece of art, it's beautiful. I love Raven Phelan's art. I'm thinking a lot about getting her Mythic Oracle, because I think that art is beautiful, and I love Greek mythology. In terms of production, this is turning into kind of a longer review than I intended it to, but you guys are used to me by now. In terms of production, the book and the box are really beautiful. The cards are also really beautiful. They're a little it's interesting, this deck. The cards, the card stock is not at all what I expected. When I watched walkthroughs of this, it seemed really like high gloss, and it's shiny, but it's not high gloss. It's pretty much like straight up cardboard. So I was surprised because I expected it to actually be glossier than it is. I thought it was going to be like super laminated, which for this deck I actually might prefer, because when I cut a deck this big, or when I overhand shuffle, I want it to, these don't slip super well. So you almost want it to be a little glossier so that they slip, especially because there's more cards and it's so large. This does riffle shuffle, by the way, but because they're so large, it's like I have to take the bulk of the cards in one hand and then a smaller pack in the other, and then it's always hard to shuffle around camera. But it does riffle shuffle well, and an overhand shuffles well. But this is a very unforgiving cardstock in ways where if you bend it, you're really going to see the creases, and hence one card I already have to have replaced. The gilding is interesting, because, on video and even in bright sunlight, it looks beautiful, but it's actually really imperfect. So it's interesting. It's almost like I wish kind of some of the money that went into the book and the box had gone into the cards, to make them just a skosh more durable, and just a little bit, I guess durable is the word I'm looking for, because it's really unforgiving stock. So here, I guess in summary, here's the thing about this deck. I think it's beautiful. When I have used it in conjunction with the guidebook, when I've been willing to do that, and I've done that a handful of times, the readings have really popped. So I think it reads really well. My frustration with it lies in that essentially I feel like I have to memorize this, and I don't know how far along that journey I'm going to go, because it in many ways the pips in this deck, the minors in this deck, lack you know, 50 to 75% of the time, they lack an intuitive hit for me. And so that means I have to go to the book. When I go to the book, they read well, you know, they make sense. So, you know, in essence, if I'm willing to think about this as purely an oracle deck, then, you know, I'm sort of more okay with it than I am as a tarot in a weird way. And that may just be my snobbery as a reader, that I don't want to have to consult a book to tell me what the card means. But I also just enjoy the flow of a reading where I don't have to. You know, and frankly, one of the benefits of a pictorial, a scenic, a situational deck like this one is having the visual mnemonic of knowing what the card means. And I don't have that with this deck. So, you know, it's a mixed review, right? Because I feel like on the one hand, it's a work of art. It's gorgeous. The production, you know, despite the stock, which I don't love, it's wonderful. You know what I mean? And when I'm willing to sit and sort of take the deck and the cards out and explore for myself, I'm happy with the readings that it gives. I just want to be able to not have to use the book all the time. I want it to be a little bit more intuitive for me. So in a weird way, it's almost like if this weren't called a tarot, if this were called the Dreams of Gaia Oracle, in a weird way, I think my expectations going in would be different, and I'd be like, oh, here's a cool system. But that it is named a tarot, I actually think sets a false expectation. So, again, it's tricky, right? But I do like it. I mean, that's the ultimate thing, and it's singing to me, like it's calling to me. It's making me want to use it. So maybe I will, you know, get to a point with this where I will start to feel more an intuitive relationship to the card images, you know. So I guess I'll stop rambling about this one now. But it is, you know, it's tricky with Taroracles, as I keep saying, and again, that trick is how. You know, we don't want every deck to be the same. We have the systems we have already. Those have been done and done and done and done. So I applaud anyone who's willing to take the gamble to create a new system and call it tarot. On the other side of that coin, it is a gamble because taking the system and pushing it is also pushing the readers and their ability and willingness to go along for the ride with you. So that, you know, that's the risk, but I think risks are worth taking. I do not regret, this is not a cheap deck for a mass market deck, but I don't regret spending the money. The readings I've had with it have been good, and I'm happy to be able to talk about it. You know, and just because I brought it out, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this again, there are walkthroughs and discussions of this, but I just, again, since we're on the topic of Taroracles, this is similar, and actually this reminds me of the Dreams of Gaia quite a lot, both artistically and structurally. So I'll just, you know, I'll talk a little bit about this one because I haven't spent a lot of time with it. This one I think is kind of less sexy to me, but a little bit more usable. So one thing I'll say right out of the gate is one of the things that has kept me from working with this deck. When I got it, I thought, oh, it's a Buddhist deck. How great. And I didn't quite, I did a little research, and after I sort of started looking at the guidebook, and then I looked up Osho Zen, and I realized that it's not quite Buddhism. It is a bit more of a guru. And so there's a card in the majors called the Master, who's Osho. And I took it out because I'm distrustful of gurus who proclaim themselves masters. Buddhists, you know, great Buddhist minds like Thich Nhat Hanh and Pema Chodron, they call themselves teachers. That hits, you know, a special place for me. Master makes me go, no. So, also the transcendental game of Zen always kind of bugged me. But, so, this deck also messes with, I didn't quite order this out the same way. it messes with the structure. To me, this is a little bit more user friendly, as I said, than the Dreams of Gaia, because it's easier to connect the dots between tarot and what this is. In fact, many of the major arcana cards are the same. So you have the Fool, you've got Existence would be the Magician. So here's a difference here. But the keywords, again, are pretty clear and precise, and that's helpful. You get High Priestess energy from this, even though it says inner voice, and you can buy that. You know what I mean? You buy the High Priestess out of that. Again, you get creativity for the Empress. You see Empress energy here. I buy it. You know, I buy this as fertility and earthiness and nurture. You know, I buy all those Empress energies. This is a stretch for the Emperor, but again, you know, it's a connection. Now here for the what would be the Hierophant or the Pope, the nothing or no thingness. This is a little affected for my taste, but you know, that's a departure. But again, you sort of look at this from a Zen Buddhist outlook. You don't have a Hierophant. You don't have this. You know, it's like almost in a traditional deck, this should be the Hierophant. But the fact that this is not that recognizes that the Osho and the creators of this deck recognize that there should not be sort of a high priest of Buddhism. You know what I mean? And so the absence of that, I think, is really beautiful. You get the Lovers, awareness instead of the Chariot. Again, you can see this and sort of get Chariot energy regardless, and you don't need it necessarily. This is beautiful for strength, beautiful for the Hermit, perfect for the Wheel. This would be 11, which would be the Justice. So again, you get a just quality. You know what I mean? There's a connection to tarot that makes it a little bit easier. This would be the Hanged Man as New Vision. Transformation would be Death. Integration would be the Temperance. Conditioning would be the Devil. Yes. This would be the Tower. Silence would be the Star. Is that right? Is that where that goes? Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, it's late and I'm not, you know, it's hard to remember all of these things, right, when you're not looking at them. Past lives, and I may have the order out of, no. Innocence, beyond delusion, and completion. So the last little bit is different. You don't get quite the sun, the star, the moon, judgment, and the world. But again, like, this is a little bit more user-friendly coming in to a traditional system. And then the pips, the minors, all have keywords on them. And again, I feel like that's successful, even if it's not a system you use, because the deck is sort of, you're working with it in more of an oracle way. But the benefit in this case, because you have the keyword, you don't have to reach for the book, which I just appreciate. It's a little bit more like reading the cards. I just want, you know, if I want to read a book, I'll read. If I want to do bibliomancy, I'll do bibliomancy, right? You know what I mean? I'm a cartomancer, so I want to like use the cards for that. So where I don't like keywords on traditional tarot decks, on non-traditional tarot decks or these Taroracles, I do like them, because you can use the image and the keyword together, but you can also add your own experience and meanings as well as shading and color. So this is the Suit of Fire, and again, you can see that it's very different from Rider-Waite-Smith. That's not across the board, but it's pretty much by and large. You know, like the Four of Wands is not the four staffs with the canopy and the dancing people, although you do get a community here in participation. So there's a little bit of a nod to Rider-Waite-Smith in this, which I think is a little bit more, it's a little bit easier for folks to transition into. Although, you know, again, here we get a very Rider-Waite-Smith Six of Wands. Here we don't get a very traditional Rider-Waite-Smith Five of Wands. There's no conflict here. Let's go through. Now, again, this does mess with the court system. a bit. And in fact, what I should have done and didn't do was look at the system. But you do not have kings, queens, pages, and knights. Each of them has a keyword and an elemental association. So for the court of fire, you get playfulness, intensity, the creator, and sharing. You know, so there's literally no court. You basically just continue on with the suit as an oracle, and that's pretty across the board. Now, by and large, I really like this deck, and I like a lot of the art. It actually reminds me a lot of the Dreams of Gaia. There are a couple cards in here that artistically or keyword-wise don't make me happy. I just don't like the coloration of this, but again, that's just personal. This feels like it's from a different deck. You know, but again, you get a very Rider-Waite-Smith energy with this, so you can draw the connection. Love this. This is very cool. I think the card, there's one of the, I think they're both in the Suit of Swords. Man, Suits of Swords are tricky, whether you're looking at a traditional deck or a non-traditional deck. And I gotta tell you, that's one reason why I just am so relieved with pip decks. Every time I buy a new pictorial or situational deck, the Suit of Swords almost always disappoints me, because I just think Rider-Waite-Smith really did a bad job. I mean, I'm just gonna be frank. I just think they really fucked up the Suit of Swords, because it's not balanced. Every other suit is relatively balanced. The Suit of Swords I find really imbalanced. And that seems to carry through to a lot of decks. So, and now when I'm reading for others, I almost exclusively use pip decks for that very reason. So here we're in the Suit of Air. Ah, yes, I hate this card. There's just something about this armor that freaks me out. And then the Two of Air I find problematic. I think that this was a thoughtless choice. I understand what they're saying, and even when you look at traditional Rider-Waite-Smith decks, you kind of see the struggle for mental balance, right? But I think this was really unfortunate, because I think it absolutely makes light of mental health in not a very good way. Katie Flowers actually talks about this, and I don't even think I noticed it because I hadn't used the deck. But once I heard her talk about it, and I looked at the image, first of all, this image and this word doesn't go together. The image has a very Two of Swords quality. No, you know what I mean? Like mental imbalance would be something else, or their struggle for balance. I think that's what the Two of Swords represents in many situations. But it's not schizophrenia, and that's a very problematic thing to make light of. Especially because culturally, it's a joke, but it's a real thing that real people suffer with, and it's very misunderstood. And so I think it's not where this is clearly a very well thought out deck and was very thoughtful. I think this is unfortunate because it is not thoughtful. Things like this kind of make me get like isolation, like really, it's a little twee for me, but. Again, by and large, this is a successful deck. Now, with the exception of the courts, I think that this is close enough to a traditional tarot where it really does feel like a tarot, and anyone who's used to any system probably could very easily make the connection. Now, does this make this better or worse than Dreams of Gaia? No. I'm just sort of sharing my thoughts. I clearly am not as... I think that this is an easier, a more user-friendly, a more thoughtful system for readers. I think it's probably easier to connect with and read this deck than the Dreams of Gaia. The Dreams of Gaia to me is more beautiful. It draws me more. I want to use it more. And again, it's sort of weird because you're comparing apples and oranges, but it like user-friendly does not necessarily mean better. It just means it's easier to use. I think that, you know, and ultimately, let's just sort of summarize with some positive. I think both of these are very successful. I don't regret getting either one of them. I probably will, now that I've looked at this again, engage with it a little bit more, because I really haven't. And there is a lot about it that I do like. And if you want to see walkthroughs of this and discussions, both Simon Two Spirit and Katie Flowers have a lot. Katie in particular, actually I think both, because Simon uses this deck every day, I think, and Katie uses it quite a lot too, or has in the past. Both have really thoughtful videos on this deck. Poor Simon had such a hard time getting a copy of this deck that didn't. That's, I guess, one thing to know too. There have been some production issues with recent runs of this deck. This is a couple, I don't know, God, 8 or 9 years old. I don't even remember when this came out, and I didn't get it when it was new, so I don't remember, but I got it pretty short after moving into the apartment I'm in now. Who cares? Why am I saying that? Anyway, I think these are both successful. It's just, again, you know what I mean? It's a matter of taste, which is always the case, and it's a matter of how much you're willing to put in to learning the system. You know, for me, the Wildwood is hugely successful, but that's also because I gave it a chance that I haven't given these other two, because, you know, Kelly and folks from, you know, from the chats and the publication of the Wild Magic book sort of presented this opportunity. I started using it, it clicked, and so we developed this friendship, you know, this deck and I have a very strong affection for this deck, which I did not expect. I mean, I really feel very, very affectionate. This deck is one of the few, again, that I've said before, that I probably will not use for others. I'm very sort of like protective of it, and we've had such good conversations, which is, you know, I read for myself occasionally. I've gotten much better at reading for myself, in part because I'm more tenacious than I used to be, and I'm good. This deck seems to want to have deeper conversations with me than the other decks do, and that's fine. This I've been using just sort of with some prompts I found on Instagram, and it's had interesting things to say. We're not quite as like thick as thieves yet as I got with this deck. I think that if I were in a situation where maybe I were dedicated to working with this deck every day for a month, that, you know, we might become really close that way. So who knows? Maybe I need to come up with some kind of Dreams of Gaia challenge for Instagram for us to explore, or like a Taroracle. Maybe we should do that. Maybe we should have a Taroracle challenge sometime this winter on Instagram to sort of work with decks that are outside the traditional tarot system, but that are still tarot in their way. So anyway, those are my thoughts on Taroracles or non-tarot tarots. These three, I think, being the most famous examples at the moment. There are others. There's the Tarot of the Silicon Dawn, which has a lot of additional cards. Oh gosh, I can't think of any off the top of my head. There's others though. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have mixed feelings because I'm in one way an adventurer, and I'm one way very happy with the system I have. So it's a funny thing, as a reader, right? Because you want to roam, but you want to come back. I think the thing that has been nice though in recent months is I've realized that like learning a new system does not mean letting go of the system you have. Sometimes I think I will forget what I'm really good at as I'm trying to learn something new, and I panic and I'm like, well, fuck that new thing. I'm gonna do this old thing that I know how to do because I don't want to lose it. But that's not really the case. You know, that doesn't really happen. So anywho, this is a very long video, and I doubt anyone has gotten this far. Maybe I'll do this in 2 parts. I don't know. Who knows? Anyway, these are my thoughts on Taroracles, the very difficult word I've just coined. And, or I don't know, if someone else used that before? Who knows? Doesn't matter. If someone else did, then I should give them credit, so let me know. Those are my thoughts. Be good, be safe, enjoy your holidays, and I'll see you soon.